Welcome, June 10th, 2023, as we open the Bible. The series is entitled 144,000 is Real, and to date the series comprises three studies, 49.1, 49.2, and 49.3. I am Derek West, president of the Mustard Seed Advent, and I use Bible evidence to reveal the meaning of the 144,000. I silence all doctrinal teachings to remove them as stumbling blocks of distortion about that throng. The Mustard Seed Advent teachings show that they shall emerge not just from the Jews as commonly misunderstood, but from all 12 tribes of Israel. And this they so shall do after having been baptized by fire. Their fire prefigures the trauma of American slavery and is also known as Jacob's time of trouble. This aspect is original to the mustard seed and is offered with unassailable Bible evidence. And now with this specific presentation, I will deepen the saga. Notice the arching banner over my head to show that the 144,000 is real by this additional study, 49.4. Arching banner, what banner? Those in the audience and those who are viewing by live stream cannot see it now. However, when this study is published in about a week, the banner as my halo will be visible for eternity. Until then, your imagination will need to suffice, perfectly giving the segue into the title of this specific Sabbath afternoon, June 10th, 2023 study. It is Redemptive Imagination. Why imagination? Some may ask. Imagination is a spiritual function of profound theological benefit. And if we are to love God with all our minds as we are commissioned, we should know that our peace comes by envisioning man's redemption by God's timeline. We, unfortunately, are afflicted with short lives, but God works by a different time paradigm. To him, a day is as 1,000 years, and this fact demands a high level of faith to please him. Such explains much of our confusion. We never thought nor comprehended that God has appropriated 3,700 years to obtain his number, the 144,000. You heard the cliche, be patient, God is not finished with me yet. Indeed, it is a Bible reality. It has taken God 6,000 years of human history, a recreation week of divinity, to bring us back to Eden. In keeping with this gauge, his first fruits of that endeavor, the 144,000, is still a work in progress. Heaven has always worked according to God's standard. It is our fall from grace, yielding death, that has created a frustration. God is okay with the fact that Christ has taken the appropriate span of time to reforge man into his likeness and after his image. We chose death over life. Thus, confidence in his promises, also known as faith, is required for our peace, joy, and victory. Therefore, he calls Israel his clay. Jeremiah chapter 18 further expounds. O house of Israel, it says, cannot I do with you as this potter, said the Lord? Behold, as the clay is in the potter's hand, so are ye in my hand, O house of Israel. Jeremiah chapter 18, verse 6. Why is the Bible the focus of our faith? Because its history covers the human experience in Christ's hands. It compensates for having not lived the experience. The holiday of Thanksgiving gives a parallel analysis to illustrate the path of the 144,000. Before explaining, let's clarify the concept of algebraic theology. Since after 6,000 years humanity still does not understand God's redemption, I challenge your powers of imagination by use of a complex analogy, a double metaphor, algebra and Thanksgiving. In math, algebra is difficult, but with Bible theology, it is easy. In fact, it requires less mental strain. Have you ever heard of the fundamental theorem of algebra? It simply means that there are many correct solutions to a riddle. They would call a problem. Ergo, it's referred to as a polynomial equation. What does that have to do with Thanksgiving? Let me explain. Poly means many, and for our use, nomial means name. We as mustard seed students, therefore, reveal many answers to applicable Bible mysteries. Life is really no different. If you think, you often face problems with multiple dimensions. Same with redemption. My experience with Thanksgiving Day celebration illustrates. For many years, Vinette and I have called the Butterball the Turkey Hotline to correctly prepare our Thanksgiving Day turkey. And, sorry vegetarians, it affords a righteous polynomial that relates well to the 144,000. The turkey is not ready to be served until it reaches 180 degrees in the oven. And this after passing through the oven, let's call it the fire, which is preset at 325 degrees. Before roasting, you first take it raw from the refrigerator, and we're paying a little attention to temperature. You take it out at yet even a lower temperature, 40 degrees. You wash it, you baste it, and stuff it. Then, when it is at room temperature, or 70 degrees, you put it in the preheated oven. Roasting it until it reaches the designated temperature, aforestated, at 180 degrees, then you take it out for a final step. That which I will call the countertop cook down, so that it cools back to room temperature. And here we have our metaphor. It must reach 70 degrees twice. To ignore this polynomial and to serve it at the first room temperature fruition, you will ruin your Thanksgiving celebration. It will be raw. 3,000 years ago, Israel was not done. She had to pass through the fire. And today, she will undergo 42 literal months to cook down before serving. Only then can the world be blessed to offer their Thanksgiving celebration to Father. In math, we call that a second degree polynomial, an equation with two answers. Transitioning to the debates and Nvidia that rage, they do so because they do not understand God's use of polynomial expressions. But still they are settled on some doctrines, on the kingdom, on the slaughter, on the 144,000 in some cases. But why not on Elijah? Many vociferously claim that he prefigures VT Hotep. But the Bible shows that Elijah has four roots to his riddle. One, the original prophet. Two, his student, Elisha, who received a double portion of Elijah's spirit. Three, there was John the Baptist. And finally, number 4, the one whom Christ promised in Matthew chapter 17, that is to restore all things, also known as Eden. The debate rages because they do not understand algebraic theology. The promise of Elijah is a fourth-degree polynomial, an equation with 4 answers. I repeat, not just the Bible, but life is full of similar conundrums. Are you a homeowner or do you rent? Maybe you rent to own. Many become a homeowner at least twice. First, when you sign the mortgage papers, and then 30 years later, when you break the banker's yoke and pay off the bank loan. Yet when asked, is this your home address, regardless of your living place or status, yes is the correct answer. Israel in the first dominion signed a homeowner's contract. And today, 3,000 years later, after Elijah restores all things, and after their turkey is cooked, so to speak, they will own it free and clear. Another example. Have you ever heard of the expression, she is over the hill? I know it's a mean thing to say about somebody. But to get there, she must hormonally first climb the hill. Then by aging, return back to the hormonal levels of her childhood, but only with an adult body. For both men and women, because we're not just talking about women, when they go over the hill, they decline from the joy of adulthood with each year. And the distresses are disturbing. Weight gain, mental capacity losses, sight loss, blood and insulin level issues, sexual dysfunction, balance and mobility losses, etc. Yea, I know that good eating, vitamins, exercise will slow the process, but the decline down the hill of the polynomial curve will still beset you as you return to the second childhood. There's just one other component to algebraic theology that helps us understand salvation. It is the square root. Don't twitch with anxiety. The theology of my math lessons are easy. We talk about our roots all the time. If you multiply 12 times 12, you get 144. Thus, the square root of 144 is 12. But the confusion in math is that the square root of a negative number is called imaginary. And I, to this day, have never learned how any make a real mathematical use of what they call imaginary numbers, but not so with the Bible. They have actual and definitive value. To illustrate and to understand the 144,000, I give you our key text. Therein the righteous are commissioned to look backwards in time to what I will call their square roots, to the lessons of Abraham and Sarah. In Isaiah 51, we are commanded, and I quote, "Hearken to me, ye that follow after righteousness, ye that seek the Lord, look unto the rock whence ye are hewn, and to the hole," to the what? "And to the hole of the pit whence ye are digged. Look unto Abraham your father, and unto Sarah that bare you. For the Lord shall comfort Zion. He will comfort all her waste places, and he will make her wilderness like Eden, and her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness shall be found therein, thanksgiving and the voice of melody." Isaiah chapter 51, verses 1 through 3. That text we will be repeating as we advance in the study. But did the point resonate? Are you a child of Abraham and Sarah? Did they bear you? They are declared to be our roots. That is, if we look to them. And by our compliance today, now, our wilderness, this place here in America, shall become to us like Eden, and we will enjoy thanksgiving. But I say this is a Bible negative. What I mean is both Sarah and Abraham are dead, and the hole in the pit that forged us is a void and intangible. Accordingly, our roots are negative or invisible. They are not on television. They are not even on a YouTube video. We can only look by use of redemptive imagination. Sure, we, like all Christians, have read about them in the Bible. Maybe you don't get it. The text commands that we, not everyone, but those who follow after righteousness, must look. To do so, we must find a tangible value of a negative square root. How? By imagination. Only we, mustard seed Adventists, no other Christians, have, by our deeper insight, by our look, have won this promised reward of Elijah's Eden. This is the benefit that we have won by uncovering Christ's name, his identity in the 144,000, the God of Israel. Do you remember that such is his name? Let me recite to you again Exodus chapter 3. God said moreover unto Moses, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, The Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, hath sent me unto you. This is my name forever. Exodus chapter 3, verse 15. As we use our imagination, we can see that Abraham and Sarah miraculously engendered Isaac. And this gave birth to us. Now, I say imagination, not because it is a fallacy, but because it is inferred. This is Sarah's story. She was 90 years old. She had long since began her life journey down the other side of the proverbial hill. Her menstrual cycle ceased. It says, and I quote, And the Lord said, I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life. Amazing. Talk about restoring all things. The reason why we are commissioned to look backwards to their experience, it says, And the Lord said, I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life. And lo, Sarah, thy wife, shall have a son. Now Abraham and Sarah were old and well stricken in age, and it ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, After I am waxed old, shall I have pleasure? And nothing wrong with having pleasure, is it? After I am waxed old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also. Genesis chapter 18, verses 11 and 12. Thus, in looking to Abraham and Sarah as commanded, our imagination demands that we examine at least these facts. We're going to see more, but let's begin with these. And why are they so vital to the 144,000? They are because Christ's name is vested in Isaac and Jacob. We must learn how he, Christ, as the potter, formed Isaac so that Isaac could in turn engender Jacob. This is the process through which they eventually bore us. I tell you, postmenopausal Sarah and Abraham's blessing has a polynomial benefit for us. One that is not made up, but one that is Bible-based. For God to cause a son to be inseminated in Sarah, a son whom he would honor as his, Isaac's God, he could refresh the languid aspects of her geriatric organs, her ovaries, her uterus, her fallopian tubes, her pelvic floor. And God could also restore all the necessary hormonal levels. These functions were still active within Sarah's body, though diminished. But herein lies the challenge that requires your imagination. Her eggs had all long since disintegrated, as only we today could know through scientific findings. And to produce a child, Abraham's seed needed to fertilize an egg within Sarah. Females are born with all their eggs, which, after puberty, ripen one at a time at each monthly cycle. That is, until they disintegrate and disappear. Therefore, God would need to recreate a new egg or implant within her one taken, frozen from a woman of stellar quality of her ancestry, perhaps Eve or one of Eve's daughters. After all, if Christ can take a rib from Adam to create Eve, why not an egg from one of his faithful daughters? Today, it is not uncommon for females to freeze an egg for future use. But even if Sarah could produce her own egg, it would be of little value to Christ because, in violation of his own law, Sarah was Abraham's sister. Probably the very reason why beforehand God rendered her barren. Christ would not ignore this, his soon-to-be ensconced and righteous prohibition against inbreeding. Creating a new egg was equally implausible because a new egg would mean a second creation. And our faith demands that we believe that Christ's original work was very good. We're told in Genesis, and God saw that everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Genesis chapter 1, verse 31. The conclusion is unassailable. God planted the egg of one of his formerly faithful female humans in Sarah. Isaac was therefore genetically engineered. Ergo, we see why the righteous must look back with imagination. And looking back also has other benefits. To continue reading our marquee text, Isaiah 51, it says, "Hearken to me, ye that follow after righteousness, ye that seek the Lord. Look unto Abraham your father, and unto Sarah," special emphasis, "that bare you. For the Lord shall comfort Zion, and he will comfort all her waste places. And he will make her wilderness like Eden, and her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness shall be found therein, thanksgiving and the voice of melody. My righteousness is near, my salvation is gone forth, and mine arms shall judge the people." Isaiah chapter 51, verses 1 through 5. Abraham and Sarah were restored to the prime of their life. Abraham and Sarah were restored to the prime of their lives, I should say. And this text manifests that only those who seek Christ, thus it speaks of only those who know his identity and do not confuse him to be Jesus or Father, are also, upon compliance to this promise, to be restored to eternal youthfulness. The same benefit is not here promised to others, not even those who also shall be redeemed. What do I mean by that? Well, we have to use our imagination here. This rejuvenation is our reward for growing in the Adventist movement. In other words, for following after the steps which lead or led to righteousness. Perhaps others who are to be saved will need the benefits of our grace or the benefits of modern wellness to gain happiness and health. Did not I tell you that casting people into the flames of hell is not God's only punitive recourse? It is only for those who can't use their imagination. But digressing no longer, Sarah's pregnancy was miraculous on even a more profound level. And this handiwork by Christ gives clarity to his name, the God of Isaac. To honor it, at the end of the divine week, he told Ezekiel in chapter 36, and I quote, "I scattered them among the heathen, and when they entered into the heathen, they profaned my holy name. When they said to them, these are the people of the Lord, and are gone forth out of his land. Therefore say unto the house of Israel, thus saith the Lord God, I do not this for your sakes, O house of Israel, but for my holy name's sake. And I will sanctify my great name. And the heathen shall know that I am the Lord, saith the Lord God, when I shall be sanctified in you before their eyes." Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 19 through 23. We can see that to praise Christ is to restore Jerusalem from expatriation. Otherwise, you take Christ's holy name in vain. Discernment of this restoration gives more reason to understanding algebraic theology. It allows us to discern the men who honor Christ's name. What about you? Do you frown at Jerusalem with disdain? If so, then you are cast among the very heathen who reproach Christ, saying he cannot preserve his people. The path of the 144,000 is a second creation from the dust of the earth, man's path back to Eden. I wonder, are men so dim-witted that they cannot relate this path to the path of their own children? When raising them, we project their development by the limits of one generation. But God has the benefit of thousands of years to manage the genetics of Jacobian refinement and to forge his gold tried in the fire. He makes best use of multiple generations to yield his results. Such is the process of forming Israel from the womb. As evidence, was it not Christ who gave to Jacob his 4 wives, yielding to him a laboratory of 4 wombs? It was from that genetic lab that the 12 sons were born, who over time will have become fathers to the 144,000. Why then would we think that he, God, not deployed the same genetic process of multiplication in the generations following? Did not Christ say, "Shout, ye lower parts of the earth, for the Lord hath redeemed Jacob and glorified himself in Israel. Thus saith the Lord thy Redeemer, and he that formed thee from the womb." Isaiah chapter 44, verses 23 and 24. And since God's beforehand work with Abraham and Sarah was, by promise, the beginning of Christ's handiwork, after all, he promised to make of them a great and mighty nation that shall bless all other nations. And since we can know that he continued his genetic engineering of their male posterity during the 200 years of their Egyptian intermarriage and polygamy before he restored them in the promised land, then we can be assured that he continued his same zeal to multiply their male genetics, even until today with the slave trade. For this cause are we told in Isaiah 10, wherefore it shall come to pass that when the Lord hath performed his whole work upon Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, I will punish the fruit of the stout heart of the king of Assyria, and the glory of his high looks. Isaiah chapter 10, verse 12. When we men seek to do such genetic manipulations, we are condemningly accused of playing God. But Christ is isolated from that indictment. He was given the right to play God. Accordingly, Jerusalem's trauma ends today, the time of our Sabbath rest. And your participation in Zion, the place of the law and the testimony, which is the Davidian crown of the Seventh-day Adventist movement, confers to you the dominion over the earth, ergo Eden, as a reward for heeding Paul's counsel to behold the goodness and severity of God. Paul says, don't bury your head in the sand. You need to look at it. Behold the goodness and severity of God. Then, as Paul also prescribed, ye shall leave Zion to deliver Jerusalem. With that promise comes a homework assignment. Dropping on your screen, there is a YouTube production, one of which is unrelated to my ministry, but that shows the African American slave experience in a brief synopsis. Watch it as part of your preparation in the finishment of Zion. Jerusalem, as shown in 49.1 and 49.3, is proven to have descended from the Congress of apostate Hebrew dignitaries whose ancestry resided in the ancient city of Jerusalem. They have two literal identities, making them a polynomic Bible expression in America today. And they become the glorious centerpiece for God's creation. When they emerge from the heat and when they return back to room temperature, so to speak, it will then be the day of Christ's Thanksgiving and celebration. Such will bring to fruition Isaiah 10's promise to punish the stout heart of the Assyrian. This blessing becomes a stumbling block for those, both black and white, who, in their hearts, wonder, how could God use African ancestry when our non-biblical and Euro ethics resoundingly disdain them as inferior people? To address this stigma, I offer no condemnation. My mission is to instead remove all stumbling blocks. In this regard, we are told more of the stout-hearted Assyrian. Isaiah 57 says, when thou criest, let thy companies deliver thee. Vanity shall take them. But he that putteth his trust in me shall possess the land, and shall say, take up the stumbling block out of the way of my people. Isaiah chapter 57, verse 13 through 14. Their vanity is their trap. This we now know is their derision of people with African ancestry. I cite to you again the affliction of Meghan Markle as an example. To remove this stumbling block, we can again look back to Abraham and Sarah. In so doing, those saints who honor the command to examine them are proven to be wise to follow after righteousness, for they are to be rewarded with full youthful vitality, sexuality, health, wealth, and vigor. The very blessings which God gave Abraham and Sarah, so that afterwards, according to Genesis 25:6, they had restored virility. In other words, they were no longer over the proverbial hill. Looking back as commanded, Abraham, when promised an heir, said to God the following in Genesis chapter 17. Shall Sarah, that is 90 years old, bear? Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. And God said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son indeed. And as for Ishmael, I will make him fruitful also, and I will make him a great nation. Genesis chapter 17, verses 16 through 20. Ishmael, who was he? He was Abraham's first son. He was born through Hagar, who was Sarah's handmaid. Hagar was an Egyptian, and Egyptians are Africans. We must microscopically look to this experience of Abraham and Sarah then. We must see that neither Sarah nor Abraham had objections with African in the royal bloodline. They both wanted God to bless them through Ishmael. Thus, our look to them frees us from the gripping vanity of the high-minded Assyrian. The very reason God tells us to look unto them. It is easy to see God's message. He, as was Abraham and Sarah, is willing to use African genetics to forge his great nations. Therefore, such a doctrine of the 144,000 should not evoke the ire of saints who follow after righteousness. This finding can remove the stumbling block that the white Anglo-Saxons have conjured, which amounts to the hatred of God's creative art. Today is the day of transformation. Thus, none need to suffer from their bigotry. All can join this work and become free. Contact this office while there is still time. Then you too can have a promised eternal rejuvenation. Then you can join in our anticipated day of Thanksgiving. And regardless of your genetic history, you can become Abraham and Sarah's heir. I don't think you heard that. And regardless of your genetic history, you can become Abraham and Sarah's heir. Here's where it gets algebraic. Either by first or second degree polynomial. This I shall explain downstream. For it says, hearken to me, ye that follow after righteousness, ye that seek the Lord. Look unto Abraham your father, and unto Sarah that bare you. For the Lord shall comfort Zion. He will make her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness shall be found therein, thanksgiving and the voice of melody. Isaiah 51, verses 1 through 3. The Garden of Eden. What a great place to retire for Thanksgiving with eternal virility. You need only to realize that Africans can also contribute to salvation. Now, taking another look at Isaiah 51, we can also dash a sexual stigma that is another stumbling block for many human beings. Early in Genesis, we are given another dimension to Sarah, one unto which we also recognize the Lord's command to look. It says, Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had an handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. Of course he did. Genesis chapter 16, verses 1 and 2. The point of focus stems from Sarah and Abraham's delusion that they could obtain an heir through her handmaid, Hagar. Unorthodox indeed. This yields for us their distorted concept of reproduction. Any child of Hagar would be her and Abraham's heir, but not according to Sarah's creative reproductive imagination. A female-on-female love connection cannot forge a reproductive formula. God's commission for us to then examine their delusion could give no benefit other than the banishment of a current stigma, a stumbling block to many saints. Thus, I told you our examination of it has a tangible value. It shows that to be blessed, we must stifle today's societal stigmas against female on female. You didn't hear me. I did not say male on male, but female on female intimacy. Sarah's imaginary number becomes an inherited negative square root that we must solve. And there is even a greater message for us to resound. It is that those things which men conjure as good and evil are twisted. Let that theme sink in. Those themes which men conjure as good and evil are twisted. African heritage is not an evil. Neither is a female on female love connection. Of this, the world is ignorant because they cannot choose the good and refuse the evil. Paul, in his ministry to the Gentiles, speaks to this issue and puts it best. In Hebrews chapter 5, he said, "For when for the time ye ought to be teachers, ye have need that one teach you again, which be the first principles of the oracles of God, and are become such as have need of milk and not of strong meat. For everyone that uses milk is unskillful." Is what? "For everyone that uses milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But strong meat belongeth to them that are of full age, even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil." Hebrews chapter 5, verses 12 through 14. That one teach you? Paul here points us to Elijah's emergence as a teacher. This we can know because Elijah restores all things, and to teach the first principles is an obvious reference to Genesis, the first setting of the oracles of God. Eden is in need of his restoration. Non-compliant Christians are rendered incapable of discerning righteousness. Thus, until you revisit the story of Abraham and Sarah, and do so under the tutelage of the mustard seed, the only man to appear behind the Genesis stories to explain the 144,000, then you cannot judge human sexuality, abortion, especially racial virtues, etc. Not to digress, but I include abortion because in Genesis, Adam, by his fall from grace, vested in Christ the license to play God and to manage all issues of humanity's life and death. Therefore, to be anti-abortion is to be anti-Christ. The good news from this elegiac message is that by Paul's algebraic theology, not just Israel, but, as I stated before, all Gentiles can also claim to be heirs of Abraham. Hebrews and Gentiles, both descendants of Abraham and Sarah. We have here yet another Bible-based polynomial answer. The first degree, I told you I would revisit this downstream. The first degree, the Hebrews. The second degree, the Gentiles. Our central text says, "Look unto Abraham your father and unto Sarah that bare you." Evidently then, all who comply are their heirs. But this contradicts Peter's negative appraisal of the Gentiles in Acts 10. Our resolution is that Paul's inclusion of Gentiles must come by a negative square root, an imaginary number. Good then, it is not just me who discerns redemptive imagination. Paul unravels this riddle in Romans chapter 11. And I quote, "For the first fruit be holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root be holy, so are the branches." Well, because of unbelief, Israel was broken off. "And thou standest by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear. For if God spare not the natural branches, take heed lest he also spare not thee. Behold therefore the goodness and severity of God. For God is able to graft Israel, the firstfruits, in again. For if thou wert cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more shall these, which be the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree?" Romans 11, verse 16, verse 20 through 24. Keynote of distinction. Paul says that Gentile inclusion into the Abrahamic root is depicted as a violation of nature. Ergo, a negative root. Thus, those who honor this, Paul's counsel to sit at the feet of this teacher, will not only learn to choose between good and evil, but they will also be heirs of Abraham to inherit the land, Eden, and receive rejuvenation, no matter by which degree. Surging ahead, we can better appreciate the regrafting of the natural branches into the righteous root to come only after the 144,000's baptism through immersion by fire. This is the tangible redemption from their own negative history. But God anticipated the drop of your proverbial jaw at this study. Thus, he posed the following question. In Isaiah chapter 42, "Who among you will give ear to this? Who will hearken and hear for the time to come? Who gave Jacob for a spoil and Israel to the robbers? Did not the Lord, he against whom we have sinned? For they would not walk in his ways, neither were they obedient unto his law. Therefore, he hath poured upon him the fury of his anger and the strength of battle, and it hath set him on fire round about. Yet he knew not, and it burned him, yet he laid it not to heart." Isaiah 42, verses 23 through 25. Christ confesses he burned Jacob, anticipating the day when Jacob is saved from his trouble. None need then be disturbed, since Jeremiah left important words regarding Jacob's final peace and salvation. So rich is his quote that it must be repeatedly dissected. In Jeremiah chapter 30, it says, "Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. For it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord of hosts." Who?
Lord of hosts.
"It shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off thy neck and will burst thy bonds, and the strangers shall no more serve themselves of him." Let's pause to absorb the first derivation. Somebody with divine power of attorney is to cure Jacob's trouble. The riveting question is, who shall take the bold step forward for this mission? Jeremiah says that the yoke breaker is not to be the same as the yoke maker. He will be someone other than the Lord, for he is called the Lord of hosts. As we recited again below, your intensity will be required to solve for the X factor. The Lord of hosts, you shall see, is not Christ, by virtue that he, Christ, is definitively cited in the same context as a secondary subject, one with a different ID commission. Is not our analysis made marvelous by the uncovering of two Bible-based answers to the same equation? But be it clear, we do not teach polytheism, for there is only one God. Instead, we understand that He, that one God, empowers different agents, polynomial powers who have, as proven in John chapter 5 and other texts, been given authority to represent Himself, God. The text professes that Jesus, the God during the time of the Gentiles, shall break the stranger's yoke off of Jacob's neck so as to preclude their further abuse of him. But Christ, who is herein called not the Lord of hosts, but simply the Lord, has a separate mission, not to break the yoke, but to return to rescue Jacob. Let us now reread to see this multiple name cooperation. Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. For it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off thy neck, and will burst thy bonds, and strangers shall no more serve themselves of him. But they shall serve the Lord their God, and David their king, whom I will raise up unto them. Note, the Lord of hosts raises up at least one other personality called the Lord their God. Thus we can know that He, the Lord of hosts, is to raise Christ, the professed and eternal God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Ergo, the Lord their God. Remember, this is His name forever. Jesus, the Lord of hosts, does not say, I will raise myself up, and they shall serve me. Instead, He promises to raise up someone else, the Lord their God, and even a third person of distinction, David their king. Otherwise, He would just say that they shall serve me when I break their yoke. The text continues, therefore fear thou not, O my servant Jacob, saith the Lord. Neither be dismayed, O Israel. In other words, Christ is saying, because the Lord of hosts is going to break his yoke, don't fear. This is what I'm telling you. Therefore fear thou not, O my servant Jacob, saith the Lord. Neither be dismayed, O Israel, for lo, I will save thee from afar, and thy seed from the land of their captivity. And Jacob shall return and shall be in rest, and be quiet, and none shall make him afraid. Jeremiah chapter 30, verses 7 through 10. Take care to note, it is the Lord and not Jesus, the Lord of hosts, who commands Jacob to have no fear. Order of events must be recognized. Jesus breaks the yoke and raises up the Lord, who in turn promises to save Jacob and the 144,000. He says, fear thou not, O my servant Jacob, saith the Lord. Neither be dismayed, O Israel, for lo, I will save thee from afar, and thy seed from the land of their captivity. Christ invisibly returns to save them. In this we see how Jeremiah's prophecy shows Jesus and Christ working in tandem. And there is yet another noteworthy point of harmony. Paul's counsel will be heeded by virtue that some of the Gentiles, the penitent, will finally put down their vanity and high-mindedness. Of all the complexities of this ministry vested in this text, we have a simple point of easy comprehension. After Jesus, also known as the Lord of hosts, is prophesied by Jeremiah to break the yoke from Jacob's neck, he simultaneously gives the assurance that the strangers will no longer exploit Jacob, but that instead they, the same strangers, will serve the Lord and David, both of whom he, Jesus, will raise up unto them. If more rumination is needed, Jesus does not give the promise that the strangers will serve himself. He says, the strangers shall no more serve themselves of Jacob, but they shall serve the Lord their God and David their king, whom I will raise up unto them. Evidently, the grafting of the wild olive tree into the root, the bosom of Abraham, shall prove to be a wise investment that is to only now pay its dividends. It is a polynomic Nineveh outcome by the ministry of antitypical Jonah, so to speak, whereby Assyrians become converted. Thus, we should all extend thanksgiving to Christ for fastidiously honoring Father's commission on his Father's own time schedule, the time which has allowed lessons of righteousness to penetrate even the proudest of human hearts. And more than that, we can garner from this text of Jeremiah 30 more validation of the 144,000, the saints who bear the name of the Lord. As we recite it in its entirety, uninterrupted, it says, alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. For it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off thy neck and will burst thy bonds, and the strangers shall no more serve themselves of him. But they shall serve the Lord their God and David their king, whom I will raise up unto them. Therefore fear thou not, O my servant Jacob, saith the Lord. Neither be dismayed, O Israel, for lo, I will save thee from afar, and thy seed from the land of their captivity. And Jacob shall return and shall be in rest, and be quiet, and none shall make him afraid. Jeremiah chapter 30, verses 7 through 10. Christ, also known as the Lord, saves not just Jacob, but his seed. This seed, then, is obviously the first fruits. Obvious because the seed are saved, but only after the yoke is broken. It is not yet to be a global salvation, but one from a very specific place that is identified to us as the land of their captivity. God told us in Isaiah what we have learned in 49.3, that Israel was to be globally scattered, beginning in two directions, Africa and Asia. But as shown already, God originates Jerusalem from the heartland of Africa, and over centuries in America grows from that troop, the 144,000. Being captured in the land beyond the rivers of Egypt, according to Isaiah chapter 8, and having gone through captivity twice, as shown in Isaiah 40, whereby it is said of them that they have paid double for their sins, then to rescue them, as cited above, from the land of their captivity, could only refer to the land of America, the land to which they were carried in the American slave trade, Israel's Thanksgiving Day oven. They descended from each of the 12 sons of Jacob, but the world thinks that they have vanished like Sarah's postmenopausal eggs. Blindness, the inability to see them, makes them 12,000 from each tribe today, intangible and negative. Thus, 12 times a negative 12,000 equals a negative 144,000, making Jerusalem's square root an imaginary number. Or in nominal Adventist parlance, an unreal and symbolic number of an extinct people. But God specializes in turning negative values into positives, such as the very definition of salvation. All that is left is for his saints, those who follow after righteousness by a spiritual function of profound theological benefit, as they look to offer thanksgiving on the basis of redemptive imagination. Having expressed this theme, I close the study by prompting you to look forward to our next study, 49.5, in 4 weeks.